Great. Welcome, everyone, to actually the second event in the third installment of the Purdue University Northwest series on race, racism, and anti-racism. My name is Karen Bishop Morris, and I'm thrilled to be moderating today's conversation with Dr. LeVada Taylor and some of her very distinguished guests and contributors to what is actually a book launch, but more about that in a minute. Just a word about this series. It is wonderful because it is faculty driven. It's very grassroots effort. Faculty over the summer, last summer, decided to get together and pull together some resources in response to the George Floyd event. And so we thought it very important to create a space for dialogue, not just for our students and staff and other faculty, but for community members. And so we've been thrilled with the reception that this event has received. We've decided to dedicate this series to Glenn Ford. Glenn Ford was the founder and executive editor of the Black Agenda Report, and he actually kicked off our series last fall. I would be remiss not to give some thanks to folks who have made this series possible. First of all, to Professor Deepa Majumdar. She's a professor of philosophy at Purdue University Northwest, and without her vision and tenacity, this series would not sustain. I'd also like to thank Chancellor Thomas Keon and Provost Kenneth Chris Holford for funding this series. We're grateful to be able to continue this work at Purdue University Northwest. Special thanks to Rachel Pollack from CHES, the College of Humanities, Education, and Social Sciences. Also to Jamie Eggert for all of the magic you're working behind the scenes. Certainly to our extremely talented dream team, the AV folks, to Greg Collins, to Sharon Allen, to Josiah Tipton and Brian Benjamin. Thank you so much. We obviously would not be able to manage all of these moving parts without you. And lastly, thank you to Sue Brimmer from Academic Affairs and to the Interim Dean of the College of Humanities, Education, and Social Sciences, Anne Gregory, for your funding support and moral support. And thanks to all of you, to our live audience members, as well as all of you who've decided to give up another lunch hour for yet another Zoom. We thank you for tuning in today. In just a minute, I'm going to turn it over to today's panelists and to Dr. Taylor, but I just wanted to share some information. On the screen, you'll see PowerPoint. Our panelists have been gracious enough to share their contact information. So here you can see, if you'd like to contact Professor Rosoboro or Professor Lightfoot or Vasquez or LeVada Taylor, their email addresses are on screen for you to see. And then this book, this conversation today, is based on this book, The Hate You Give, Implications of Race and Racism in Student Evaluations of Teaching. And the editor of this collection, Dr. Taylor, has been kind enough to make this link available. So if you're interested in purchasing the book, we invite you to visit this link, https:/roman.com/Lexington, and take advantage of this 30% discount code. You won't regret it. So with that, I'd like to just remind everyone listening to please feel free at any time to post your questions to the chat. The format for today is I'll introduce Dr. Taylor, and then Dr. Taylor will in turn make some opening remarks and introduce our distinguished panelists. At any time, again, post in the chat, and we promise to leave time at the end for you to be able to have your questions addressed. So with that, Dr. LeVada Taylor is an associate professor of education in the School of Education and Counseling at Purdue University Northwest. Her teaching and research interests are grounded in post-colonialism, post-structuralism, and culturally responsive pedagogy. A graduate of Louisiana State University with a PhD in curriculum and instruction with concentrated emphasis in curriculum theory, Dr. Taylor's research examines the experience of historical marginalized learners within the socio-political context of schooling. Her work has appeared in Educational Foundations, Educational Studies, Urban Education, Democracy in Education, and Essays in Education. Additionally, her work appears in the following books: Curriculum Studies, The Next Moment, and Race, Gender, Curriculum Theorizing, and her more recent edited text, again, Implications of Race and Racism in Student Evaluations of Teaching, The Hate You Give. Dr. Taylor is known and highly respected as an urban educator. A native of Nashville, Tennessee for over 30 years, she has empowered students to rise to excellence at every level. Her journey in higher education began in 2001, when this trajectory of her career path as an assistant professor in the School of Education at the former Purdue University Calumet. In 2007, she was tenured and promoted to the rank of associate professor. From 2008 until 2011, she served as the head of the Department of Teacher Preparation in the School of Education and Counseling. And I think it's appropriate to say she was actually the first African-American head of a department on our campus. Dr. Taylor has always been keenly aware that when students enter schooling spaces, the need to address opportunity gaps in equity and achievement are paramount. Additionally, the need to teach for social justice is at the forefront of her consciousness. To date, Dr. Taylor continues to be someone who connects with her sense of authenticity, her passion for addressing issues of equity, diversity, and inclusion in education, and her ability to embrace her path for continuous growth as she recognizes that even as an educator, she too will always be a student. It is my distinct pleasure to welcome and turn the mic over to Dr. LeVada Taylor. Welcome, Dr. Taylor.
Thank you. My heart drops each semester when I receive the alert that it is now time for student course evaluations. Yes, it remains true that I have had many positive student evaluations of my teaching. However, it remains equally valid that I have had more than my fair share of negative student evaluations. During my graduate school experience, I recall being traumatized by student evaluations of my teaching in my first diversity in education class. This was the first course I ever taught on a college or university campus. One of my favorite graduate professors attempted to provide comfort by sharing with me that student course evaluations were no big deal. Specifically, he stated, "You will have some semesters when students will love you, and you will have some semesters when they frankly will not like you at all." I remember his words as if they were just spoken yesterday. His decree, though satisfying at the time, failed to prepare me for the way student evaluations of teaching mirrored understandings of racism, sexism, and classism. His words did not inform me of the way students weaponize evaluations of teaching against BIPOC faculty, nor did he tell me how SET results influence promotion and tenure considerations, merit pay increases, and contract renewals. His words did lend credence to my subsequent findings that SETs lack validity and reliability. However, he failed to share with me that because of SET results are often subjective and inconsistent, they are an inept instrument when measuring teaching effectiveness. As I reflect on yesterday, my new awareness only makes me more puzzled today. I now find myself wondering, if student evaluations of teaching do not measure teaching effectiveness, then what do student evaluations of teaching measure? Additionally, why are student evaluations of teaching so intimately tied to high stakes rewards and punishments? For me, these questions laid the foundation of a problem. As a researcher, this problem was one that needed to be explored. The introduction. Implications of race and racism in student evaluation of teaching. The hate you give. THUGLIFE. The hate you give little infant F's everyone. Meaning, what you feed to us as seed grows and blows up in your face. In 1994, From the Cradle to the Grave was released, the 9th song on the only album entitled Thug Life, Volume 1, produced by Tupac Shakur and his group, Thug Life, created from his acronym, Thug Life, Volume 1, in lyrics and experience, portrayed through image and video representation, an interrogation of systemic oppression, that is, institutional racism, sexism, police brutality, the prison industrial complex, policing, social class exploitation, de jure segregation, eugenics, and political and economical disenfranchisement. A multi-generational beat, Thug Life Volume 1, spoke to the experiences of America's youth in the 90s, while forecasting how the hate given to our children would one day inform who they would become as adult human beings divorced from humanity. Later, the movie, The Hate U Give, a spinoff of Tupac's notion of thug life, touched on racism, hinted at social class exploitation and de jure segregation, while focusing specifically on police brutality, a fragment of Tupac's larger reflection on systemic racism, sexism, the prison industrial complex, social class exploitation, de jure segregation, eugenics, economic and political disenfranchisement. Social practices that create isms in today's society that are so powerfully shaping the experiences of our children while molding their emerging adulthood to be divorced from human compassion. Practical applications are witnessed as our children watch the kind of hate that allows a man to put his knee on the neck of another man and choke him to death while he cries for and loses his life in 8 minutes and 46 seconds on every news syndicate, both nationally and internationally. Learned behavior garnered as the Attorney General of the United States, William Barr, tells them, our children, that their reactions to what they saw, their riots, their outcry, their pain, and their humanity experienced in connection with a loss of life was too extreme. Those who protested were thugs. Their deviant behavior represents a thug's life. Played out in mainstream culture, Thug Life of the 2020 riots mirrored Tupac's imagery of defiant urban street culture, spitting, fighting back while talking Black to white dominant culture and systemic oppression. However, to date, what has not been captured is the effect of the hate given to US young adults who were or were not in the streets with their peers, mourning and fighting against the abomination that made the deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and countless other Black and brown bodies, both possible and probable. To date, few have explored the impact of this type of hate on students situated in classrooms and enrolled at college and university campuses, nor how this hate informs their interactions and learning experiences with faculty of color. Here, I'll refer to young adults who are equally products of dominant US culture, unfortunately emulating a society shaped by institutional racism, sexism, police brutality, the prison industrial complex, social class exploitation, de jure segregation, eugenics, as well as political and economical disenfranchisement. Youth, largely due to resegregation, whose experiences with difference and oppression are often illuminated through schooling and by media representations of otherness. The poor working class, women, LGBT, queer, and or people of color, African Americans, Latino Americans, Native Americans, Southeast Asian Americans, Blackness. And perhaps more intriguing is the way these colonizing images, memories, and teaching influence the hate students give Black, Indigenous, people of color, BIPOC faculty through their evaluations of teaching. A review of literature. Documented as the single most researched topic in higher education, literature on student course evaluation is vast and considered a hot topic in academia. Proponents of student evaluations of teaching argue that SETs are necessary for accreditation purposes and are a prudent measure of teaching effectiveness. Other researchers argue that SETs are not reliant measures of teaching effectiveness at all, but rather are mirrors informing university administrators that class size, anticipated grades, discipline of study, and teacher-directed individual assignments, as well as few to no courses focusing on diversity and on multiculturalism, are the keys to students' happiness. In these conversations, research on class size posit a direct relationship between class size and positive evaluations. Specifically, this body of work argues that the smaller the class size, based on number of students, the better are student evaluations of teaching. Other researchers note that grades are a truer indication of students' perception of their experience. Here they hold that when students are doing well in both elective and required courses, faculty receive more positive course evaluations. A student's discipline of study has also been cited as a determining factor of positive and/or negative course responses. To this end, researchers maintain that professors who teach in the humanities receive better student evaluations than those teaching in science and social science fields. Moreover, a direct correlation between individual student course evaluations and positive responses on student evaluation of teaching is also found in current bodies of literature on SETs. Specifically, Moyer and Moyer note that the digital age generation Xers, Ys, and Zs fear working in groups and hold that requiring little to no group work assignments will yield better student course evaluations. While other researchers reveal the tendency for faculty who teach courses on or related to diversity or multiculturalism to receive more negative course evaluations. Additional bodies in this vast literature on SET highlights the influence of likability, social class positionality, gender, political views, perceived attractiveness, as well as allure on students' perceptions of experience gleaned in students' evaluations of teaching. Yet when disaggregated by race in each of the variables and nuances named above, faculty of color overwhelmingly receive poor SETs when compared to their white counterparts, irrespective of class size, grades, discipline of study, course assignment, likability, social class, gender, political views, perceived attractiveness, and allure. Statement of the problem. Student evaluations of teaching are more than objective measures of teaching effectiveness. Rather, SETs are a subjective kaleidoscope infused with implicit bias and a reflection of racial hate. Given to students to evaluate faculty of color, these evaluations often demonize BIPOC faculties, whose intended presence in the academy is to broaden students' experience with diversity while preparing them to interact with and participate in a global society. A vision stunted by what Tupac named a hate given to little infants that F's us all. Thank you all for attending today's book launch presentation. Discussing each of their contributions to this work, implications of race and racism in student evaluation of teaching, The Hate You Give, we have first Dr. Donyell Rosoboro. Dr. Rosoboro is a professor and currently serving as the interim Chief Diversity Officer at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington. The daughter of working class Black parents, she received her BA in secondary education from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, a Master of Arts in History from Wake Forest University, and PhD in Curriculum and Teaching Cultural Studies from the University of North Carolina, Greensboro. She has over 30 publications, including a guest edited issue with Sabrina Ross of Vitae Scholastica, the Journal of Educational Biography on the Pedagogies of Black Educators, a book entitled Jacques Lacan and Education, a Critical Introduction, and an edited volume with the late Dennis Carlson, The Sexuality Curriculum and Youth Culture. In 2016 to 2017, she was the lead principal investigator on a Fulbright Hays Group Study Abroad grant for just under $90,000 to take 12 teachers on a month-long study abroad experience to South Africa. And just recently, she was the co-PI on a $208,000 Fulbright grant that brought 22 international teachers to study the educational system in the United States for 6 weeks. While at UNCW, Dr. Rosoboro has served as program coordinator, director of school university partnerships, department chair, and associate dean. After Dr. Rosoboro shares her narrative, we will have Dr. Ramon Vasquez. Dr. Vasquez is an assistant professor of teacher education at State University of New York at New Paltz, excuse me. His area of specialization includes critical race theory, decolonizing pedagogies, curriculum studies, indigenous methodologies, and abolitionist education. Prior to working in higher education, he served as a bilingual elementary teacher in Los Angeles. Dr. Vasquez received his PhD from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Last but not least, we will have Dr. Jonathan Lightfoot. Dr. Lightfoot is an associate professor in the Teaching and Learning and Technology Department and inaugural director of the Center of Race, Culture, and Social Justice at Hofstra University. He received his PhD in Policy Studies from the University of Illinois of Chicago, master's degree with concentration in school law and segregation from Harvard University's Graduate School of Education, and bachelor's degree in economics from Cornell University. Dr. Lightfoot represented Hofstra School of Education on the University Senate as chair of the Graduate Academic Affairs Committee. He also served the faculty union as part of the AAUP collective bargaining team that successfully negotiated a multi-million-dollar 5-year contract with senior administration. He enjoys advising various students groups, conducting professional development workshops, and delivering keynote addresses and panel presentations on critical race matters, identity construction, and social justice issues. A question and answer period will follow at the conclusion of each of their contributions. Dr. Rosoboro.
Greetings, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, okay. It's my honor to be here. So I'll just start off giving you a brief overview of my chapter in the book. Thanks to LeVada for actually working with us. It's been an incredible endeavor, actually one of the few collaborative processes that I've been involved in research in a while. So my chapter actually focuses on questioning the philosophical underpinnings of student course evaluations in a society marked by systemic racism. So my fundamental assumption or question is, how can student course evaluations or student perceptions of instruction ever truly be objective if we know that we live in a society with systemic racism, and not to mention other isms, other discriminatory perspectives or biased perspectives. And so part of what I do is try to lay out this really quick history of Black faculty in academia, particularly as they work at PWIs. So in the chapter, you'll see that it's ultimately framed with Anna Julia Cooper's critical question, when and where I enter, as well as what are we worth? So she brings up these important questions of identity as it relates to the intersectional nature of that identity, particularly for her being Black and a woman. And she also brings up this question of value, which I relate to student course evaluations, student perceptions of instruction, in that Black people, if inherently presumed to be less than, inferior, incompetent, not intellectual, if that is an assumption and deeply ingrained in our society from its historical beginnings, then a question of worth and value is always present for Black faculty in the academy, and it is always going to undercut students' perceptions of our ability to teach. So that's sort of the backdrop of my paper. And then I talk about school reputation. I relate that to some of the ways that school desegregation actually led us on this path towards in higher ed, dealing with very similar issues with different populations as it relates to instruction and academia, particularly at PWIs. Talk about a little bit about eugenics, and then in the end, hopefully give some hope and process about what we can do as faculty members and as administrators, knowing what we know about the inadequacy of course evaluations, and that's probably too gentle of a term, as it relates to faculty of color and women within the academy. So that's sort of the outline of the chapter, and we can go forward from there, LeVada.
Thank you. Dr. Vasquez. Dr. Vasquez, you're on mute.
Oh, you would think after 18 months I would have learned that. I was saying that my work is actually very similar to Donyell's work in that I look at some of the assumptions in set scores, and one of the main assumptions is that it's somehow objective. While we know that that's not the case, what my work actually looks at in more detail, it interrogates sort of this dichotomy between good and bad evaluations. Because one of the things that I noticed in my evaluations when I was teaching a diversity and inclusion class was that there's a paradox there. I had very high evaluations for the technical categories, like provides feedback, is organized. And I'm talking about like 4.8, 4.9, which is quite high, yet embedded within those high scores, students weaponize very noxious comments about the content. Diminishing not only my teaching, but actually diminishing the content that I was teaching as content that wasn't worth knowing. Over and over again throughout all of my evaluations, even when they had very, very high numerical scores, comments such as, I don't know what I learned. This is crazy content. It's not necessarily what I need. Professor is very intelligent, but doesn't teach the content properly. This is something that's repeated over and over again in terms of questioning the very knowledge that I was teaching. And that's one of those paradoxes that I want to tease out, because going up for promotion and tenure, these evaluations actually act as a type of filter. They send the dog whistle to administrators, because even though the numerical score is high, 4.8, 4.9, these comments do not go without notice. And the very questioning of my existence and the questioning of my being in the university is also embedded in throughout comments that say that, he's great, he's very intelligent, but he doesn't teach the content that I want to know. He doesn't teach the content that I paid for, basically. And so this brings up issues about how sets are actually used to police, Black and brown bodies, and how it shows a window into how many white students not only weaponize sets to punish faculty of color, but it also is a way of exerting this dominance and reminding us that we're here to serve them, and we're here to teach them a version of social justice that they paid for and that doesn't upset them too much or question the underlying logics of the university or of teaching. So, thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, LeVada, for that introduction, and thank you for editing such a powerful volume of work from faculty such as ourselves, marginalized faculty and other faculty who've had, I think, powerful documented experiences with student evaluations of teaching. With my chapter, I titled my chapter, Keeping It 100, Speaking Black Truth to White Power. That was something that was important to me, to try to stay as close to the truth as possible. That's something that I value. And it seems as though everybody was having the opportunity and the privilege of being honest with me, but it seems as though I would get in trouble if I would be too honest or to be truthful about what I was experiencing, what I was thinking, and the connection that I had with my students. It's something that I think works from that whole W.B. Du Bois double consciousness notion, where you really have to not only think about what you're experiencing, but how other people experience you. So that was something that was important to me. So it's my goal to try to keep it 100 as much as possible, particularly when my leadership department chairs and what have you were able to be candid with me as to how students evaluated me in a particular way, and were expressing their concerns about their understanding of me as a Black professor at a predominantly white institution. So this was a concern of mine. So I looked at a lot of experiences of similarly situated faculty to try to document and lend their support to my overall theme of trying to stay true to myself in my profession. So I use three basic theories that I was looking at to try to explicate that whole notion of being candid, being honest, being unapologetic, and unashamed of who I was and how I came to the academy. So critical race theory was one, a conceptual framework that offered me guidance in trying to understand student evaluation of teaching. Occupational stereotyping was another theory that I looked at to help me as far as providing foundation for understanding the experience. Occupational stereotyping is designed to describe the preconceived attitude one demonstrates towards a particular profession. So you would think that certain teachers, kindergarten teachers, primary teachers are expected to be women, people in leadership positions in government and so forth, CEOs and corporations are expected to be white men. And artistic creators, dance, music, fashion, and entertainment are often stereotyped to be members or allies of the LGBTQ community. And lastly, social role theory was also used to help understand why female professors receive negative evaluations, more negative evaluations than male professors in the academy. And Black women in particular are often hit with a double jeopardy, a double stigma of being Black and being female, which are two obstacles that they have to overcome. So my overall goal, once I try to lay it all out as far as really rendering student evaluation and teaching as being pretty much an unfair way of determining one's teaching ability, was to come up with alternatives. And particularly, my focus was on portfolios. I wanted to make sure that students, or I should say, once you're no longer a graduate student entering the academy, particularly on the tenure track, that you really understand what you're entering into when it comes to teaching, research and scholarship and service, understanding that trinity for which you will be evaluated on, and figure out how you're going to make certain that your value, your worth, your expertise will be acknowledged and valued as it should be. So making sure that your portfolio is well documented, that you have a mentor, that you're clear and deliberate about everything that you do. You make sure that you come up with the kinds of alternative ways to interpret your teaching, making sure that you have the kinds of publications in your research and scholarship area that hopefully speak to and speak honestly about your contribution to the academy as a marginalized faculty member, and to get credit for that. And also for service, that you make sure that as is oftentimes the case when you are part of a marginalized group, small numbers, minoritized group, that you don't get locked into a system where your focus is on committees and you're doing a lot of service work that's not going to be valued when it comes to tenure and promotion, that you keep a balance of that. I know it's difficult pre-tenure to say no about things, but I think when you work with a department chair or other colleagues to stress that you need time to not only prepare for your classes to do well as you teach, but also to prepare well for the kinds of publications that you're going to have. You need time for that. So, the balance and making sure that portfolio is reflective of that. So there's one assignment that I'll share with you and how I often begin my classes in anticipation of negative evaluations. And I have to be honest again that not all my evaluations were bad, but the few, it's almost as if when you get a few negative ones, they seem to carry more weight than I think they deserve. So primarily most of my evaluations, have been positive, and I really take a closer look at it. But those who did complain seem to, get a lot of attention that I think was out of balance, when it comes to the teaching aspect. So what I did was create an assignment, and that assignment was the self-evaluation of learning, because my focus, as Paulo Freire suggests, is that it's really all about teaching and learning. You can't have teaching without learning. And if students were given an opportunity not only to get credit for writing a letter to me describing their learning in their course with me, that I could include that in my portfolio and have that stand in, I think, comparison with, those standard SETs, the student evaluation of teaching forms. I lend credibility to that assignment, even though they do have their names on it, and oftentimes you don't spew negative information, if you're going to be identified with that. But I think there's a way to authenticate that and to validate letters as being true, that they truly did learn something in my class, and that be counted when it comes to discussions of whether or not someone is going to be tenured or promoted in a particular department. So all in all, I want to make sure that those who are new faculty, they get the kind of information that they're going to need to, be deliberate, to anticipate problems, and to, be able to have some instrument that can support them when the expectation is that there's going to be some kind of, negative aspersions cast against you. So, and to argue for that and to make sure that you're getting supported by your department or by colleagues or mentors who may not be in your area, to make sure that you have a good experience when it comes to submitting a file that will be well received, and you eventually get tenure or you eventually get promoted.
Thank you, Dr. Lightfoot. So I have a series of questions for each of you. Dr. Rosoboro, in your chapter, you talk about the relevance of school reputation to systemic racism. Could you elaborate more on that position?
Yes, I can. So when I've been teaching for a long time, y'all, but one of the enlightening moments for me in my own personal reflection of myself as a teacher, my positionality, and how I was historically contextualized was this: when I realized that Robert Carter, one of the NAACP attorneys who argued the school desegregation case, Brown versus the Board of Education, literally said, in hindsight, reflecting on that decision years later, that the NAACP attorneys had only considered equal education as integrated education. And even though they had educators working with them and consulting with them, they had not considered what equal education might have to do with teaching practice. So that was a powerful epiphany for me. Had a lot of things to do with where we are now with school choice and the ideological debates around that. So how does this relate to school reputation? Years later, when I was working on my dissertation, I came across the research on stigma, Goffman's work, and stigmatized identity. And in as much as I kind of knew what that had to do with individuals, I had not thought about what it meant for an institution. So what happens if a school has a stigmatized identity? And what does that have to do with its reputation? Well, you can fill in the blanks. So if you're an individual and you're managing a stigmatized identity, you can hide it, you can confront it openly, you can acknowledge it. There are all kinds of ways that people manage stigmatized identities. If you're a student at a school with a stigmatized identity, how do you even know, or how do you even manage it? And so that to me was a powerful point of reflection. So what does this have to do with school reputation? I'll ask that question again. In my chapter, I try then to make this connection to if we know that we live in a society that is continued to be plagued with systemic racism, if we know that Black people were still considered to be intellectually inferior in some instances, if we know this, if we know that course evaluations are problematic, how then do we actually, as administrators, as faculty members, talk about the intersections of all of this? One's personal identity, professional identity as a faculty member, the reputation of the school, whether or not you were at a school like a PWI who has this stellar reputation and gets all kinds of gifts and funding, versus you might be at a historically Black institution and you might have a good reputation where you stand, but in the larger schema of how schools are rated, your reputation might not be ranked as highly for all kinds of reasons that still relate to race. So I wanted us to think about this complicated argument, what school reputation has to do with the school's identity and your personal identity and stigma and how that relates to race. A couple of more points that I wanted to make. So DeMarcus Jenkins talks about school reputation as a site of struggle for educators. And I think it's a perfect analogy. It is a site of struggle in so many ways, but I don't know that we're intentional in the ways that we position ourselves in that struggle. I don't know that as administrators at an institution, I'm Black and I've been an administrator for almost 8 years. I have been in on those conversations for faculty as we're talking about who should get promoted to full. I have been in on those conversations when we're talking about who should be promoted to associate professor. And we literally have a lot of work to do in terms of how we define the criteria, how we make it transparent, how we ensure that our students are actually educated in the process, not just in the classroom, but in their understanding of what the purpose of a course evaluation tool is at our institution. So that site of struggle is important to me. And then last but not least, I learned, and this was another point of epiphany, that in their argument for school desegregation, Carter and Thurgood Marshall and the other legal team had to make this argument that, hey, what if we could give all the money to schools equally? Schools still wouldn't be equal, quote unquote. Why not? Because there are certain intangible qualities and characteristics of schools like school reputation that you can't just buy. So what does that have to do with us today? We are still caught up in the rankings. And even at my institution, if you look at our website, all of our rankings are there. What does that matter? And what meaning is there in that rankings? We know it matters in as much as we know that it probably shouldn't matter. And if it's going to matter, how does everybody on this campus really understand the history and the contextualization of those rankings as it relates to race? And so I just wanted to say, as we think about that connection between school reputation and systemic racism, I wanted to be sure that people started to really deconstruct the history of racism as it relates to reputation.
Thank you. Dr. Vasquez, what did you hope to accomplish in your chapter?
Well, I really wanted to complicate the notion that set scores measure anything at all. In the way what I theorized, because I was wrestling with how can I have high numerical scores and yet have these very deadly comments that question my commitments to everything, question my intellectual commitments, my ethical commitments. So one of the things that I theorize in my chapter is how set scores actually provide an outlet for students who are operating under bad faith. And what I mean by that is that it's an extension of the white gaze. It's a way of continuing the white gaze and continuing to control what I teach and by extension, trying to control what I think. I use the concept of whiteness as property from critical race theory, Cheryl Harris, to sort of create a way of looking at how it's more than just a sense of entitlement. You know, everybody has a certain sense of entitlement, but this, especially at a historically white university, which is the site of this work, there is more than a sense of entitlement. It's actually a sense that they own me, that, you know, they paid for something because it was a private university. They paid for something and they expect me to teach the content properly. Again, this was for a diversity and inclusion course. What they expected was exactly what you can imagine, a reproduction of deficit narratives, teaching them how to, actually enact their savior narratives and their savior discourses, with Black and brown students. And so this thing that I wrestled with for a long time is like, why would they give me high numerical scores on like very organized or syllabus easy to understand? Why give me a 4.8 or 4.9 or even 5 on that, and then write that I'm using crazy stuff, which is a word that keeps coming up in my evals, crazy stuff, too radical, nice guy, but talks too much about race. And this whole theorizing took me to a different place. And I realized evaluations that are overly negative are easily dismissed. I can go to my chair or to my dean and say, look, I have a 0 here, or I have a 2.0. Obviously, this student is biased. Obviously, this student is trying to ding me. But this is how sets lend themselves to be weaponized in ways that are a lot more subtle that I wanted to theorize. It's harder to dismiss an eval when it has 4.8s and 4.9s for the technical categories. But then has these very noxious, these very deadly, these very racist white supremacist comments spread out throughout the voluntary, the optional comment section. So that's what I'm trying to theorize. It's like, how is it that these set scores actually operate as tools of white supremacy and operate as an extension of the white gaze and of the policing of Black and brown bodies and Black and brown intellectual commitments. And so that's sort of, this idea that white students, strategically deploy, bad faith to sort of let it go through. The other idea I think about is like the dog whistle. It is sort of a dog whistle, the comment that he's excellent, he's very intelligent, but he doesn't teach the content properly. That sends a signal to chairs and deans that I'm not really fit. And that's another aspect of sets, is that they actually act as filters to sort of change your trajectory and affect whether or not you actually are considered for tenure. I mean, I don't have to share with you the data that faculty of color are less likely to achieve tenure. Faculty of color are less likely to stay in higher ed. And so part of it is this thing. So I think we have to like problematize this dichotomy between good and bad evals, because an eval can be both good and bad, but it does something. And it's very intentional. So yeah.
Thank you. Dr. Lightfoot, what reservations or concerns, if any, did you have about getting on a tenure track at a PWI?
Good question, thank you. I had some reservations and some concerns. Once I finished my doctorate, I actually did not get on the tenure track right away. I spent a couple of years actually as a visiting professor at 2 different colleges and universities. And when I figured out that, okay, I think I'm gonna do this, because as I mentioned in my chapter, I took the scenic route to the academy. I see a question in the chat actually about, how, these kinds of issues work in the corporate America. I spent about 10, 11 years in corporate America before I even returned to school to, figure out that I'm gonna end up being an academic. And actually, when I got into a PhD program, I'm thinking that I was just gonna be an administrator, because I was associate vice chancellor for student services at the city colleges of Chicago. So I was actually looking to submit my position, as a senior level administrator, either there or somewhere else. But it was my dissertation chair, Steve Tozer, the author of the book, textbook, School of Society, who told me that I was faculty, that I was not administrator. And so he helped me actually to see something that, I probably should have saw it myself, at least should have accepted in myself. So, but when it comes to the environment, I was glad that I went to a predominantly white, Black high school. And I come from a Black community. It was segregated, and it was predominantly Black. And I entered I would say, quote unquote, white world when I went to Cornell University, upstate New York. And that's when I started my lesson in learning about whiteness and white privilege and entitlement and the whole the class consciousness, all of this was, opened up to me, even though I was aware of it. Actually being immersed in it and experiencing it is something different and something that I had to get used to. And since then, from first year of college, I've pretty much been in a quote unquote white world, either professionally or academically. So getting on a tenure track at a predominantly white institution, in answer to your question, was of concern. But I knew that I could handle it because, for the last, at that point, 15 to 20 years prior, I had been able to be successful, in a white world where I was oftentimes the only Black or very few Blacks in my area, in my department, wherever I was working. I was, one of a few. So I felt a certain level of comfort and a certain level of confidence that, I could handle it. But I also knew that I had to be vigilant about when racism would rear its ugly head and what would be my response, and that I would not jeopardize, my career or sabotage, my own career when, it was inevitable that, it would happen. So, those concerns were very prevalent. And I put in my chapter, about keeping it 100, when oftentimes the complaints that I had, when it comes to evaluations, or when students actually just go and tell the department chair or the dean that they had a problem with me. And usually, as Dr. Vasquez has said, that he's a smart guy, but he talks about racism too much. But racism is in the title of my dissertation. So when they hired me, they knew what they were getting: a person who was going to talk about anti-racism, who was going to talk about the issues that are pertinent to someone whose area of expertise is social foundations of education. We talk about racism, we talk about sexism and classism and issues of identity and marginalization. That's what we do. So you hired me to do this. And so, don't now, say that it's a problem, because you don't hire a mathematician and tell the mathematician, don't talk about numbers. And that's the way I felt about hiring a Black professor whose area of expertise, is, issues of race and racism in the curriculum. So, I felt that, I had to stand by, my truth. When the dean said I have academic freedom, when the students who went to the dean and said that, he talks about racism too much, the dean told me that he supported me and told them that I enjoyed academic freedom as a college professor to work from a theoretical or conceptual framework that, looks at phenomena through this lens, through this perspective. So, you really just have to just know who you have. So sometimes the administration will support you and sometimes they won't. I think it's a strategic operation to, find out, who's on your side and make sure that they give you the kind of true support that you need to, make it through on that tenure track. So, I had concerns, I had issues with that. I feel that, this is the best place for me to be to speak these kinds of issues and these kinds of truths to predominantly white students at PWIs. Yeah.
Dr. Rosoboro, how should faculty reconsider course evaluations when they must be used in the promotion and tenure process?
So thank you for that question. I will say this on the administrative side. Let me start there. So part of my response is grounded in real world situation. Faculty member of color, and I was trying to mentor her as she was trying to put together her tenure dossier with all of these course evaluations that probably did not look so great. So I challenged her she's a phenomenal qualitative researcher. I challenged her to think about them from a qualitative research perspective. So yes, we know the students are They're evaluating you from a perspective that could even be unexamined. Most likely it is unexamined from them. They may not be looking at institutional racism. They may not be considering their own biases in the process. And we haven't necessarily taught them to do that either. So what, if anything, do you have control over in the promotion tenure process? So deconstruct those course evaluations and focus on addressing the things that are only related to teaching. I forgot who said this, Ramon or Jonathan talked about this earlier. So in my own situation, for example, my first year teaching had some horrible course evaluations. And what I did was, one of the charges leveled against me was that my grading criteria were unclear. So I created rubrics. Do I care about rubrics? Not really. I would rather not have grades, as a matter of fact, because I prefer to just give feedback and for us to engage in this dialogue or conversation about your work, to develop you as a scholar, and develop is probably not the right word, but to cultivate my student scholarship. So at any rate, I created rubrics. I have been teaching here for going on 15 years. I have not had that criticism again, that people are unclear about my grading criteria. Is one thing I could address in the process. So one of the things I challenge faculty as they're going up for tenure is to just address, this is not about who really is a good teacher, because can we really define that? This is about how you respond and how you provide evidence of actually trying to improve your teaching. Having said that, from the administrator side, I've had to write a letter with citations for someone so that those above me who were evaluating that person's tenure dossier would understand the research about what student evaluations of teaching say or reflect or represent as it relates to race and gender and other identity markers. So I did that. And I think we all are obligated to do that if we're writing letters in support of or about someone's tenure dossier. And then the last thing I will say, this is huge for me, is to understand the value of language. Students are translating those questions and the vocabulary in the course evaluation instrument. So if you've not looked at it, and if you've not talked about what those terms mean to people, then they're going to interpret it in whatever way they choose to. So for example, and this is in the chapter, I have to actually go back and look at this. In my own course evaluation instrument, it says, describe the frequency of your instructor's teaching procedures. These are the bullet points. Displayed a personal interest in students and their learning. What does that mean for a student? Like, what would a student say I did a great job with in terms of displaying a personal interest in them and their learning? Does it mean I asked about their life? Does it mean I provided good feedback? What does it really mean? Lots of possibility there. A couple of others made it clear how each topic fit into the course. And this one in particular was one that I took issue with. Explained course material clearly and concisely. Where there's an assumption there that explaining course material concisely is better. And it might not need to be explained concisely. Would you expect the math instructor to go back to that example to explain the course material concisely? Or would you expect that it's complex material and it might take a while? So those 3 points are the ones that, I just wanted to make. One is to help faculty understand the course evaluation process. And we should change the language, right? So the American Sociological Association came out with this report in 2019 that said it's not evaluation. Let's talk about changing that. It can be considered a feedback process. And some universities have started changing that language. So to get, number one, to get faculty to understand what is it that you can address, because good teaching is ambiguous in the definition. Number two is to make sure that we as administrators are understanding how to support faculty in our letters in the process, and to educate ourselves and our colleagues about how race and gender are perceived by students in the process. And as I said, the last part goes back to language, making sure that you at least look at the language and the course evaluation and actually help your students deconstruct it and translate it.
So just a huge thank you. I want to share with all of the panelists today, Dr. Rosoboro, Dr. Lightfoot, and Dr. Vasquez, how much appreciation is coming through in the chat for this conversation. It's interesting, as Dr. Taylor made the comment in her opening remarks, that Student evaluations of teaching is one of the most documented subjects, and yet I can't ever remember such a powerful and riveting conversation as this. So thank you again, Dr. Taylor, for making this possible. But there are some questions in the chat. We have just about 12 minutes remaining, so I want to make sure that we get to those. The first one is directed at you, Dr. Vasquez. Early on, when you gave the introduction to your chapter, you said, quote, "Don't question the logic of the university." What do you mean by that? Can you expand a little bit?
Sure, and I'm specifically talking about teacher education, where there is a certain logic operating in teacher education that knowledge can be transferred into neat little compartmentalized packages, and then that knowledge is then transferred to the students. The course I was teaching was called, diversity and inclusion, and what I referred to in my chapter as the cookbook class, because we had a very scripted, what I call a master script, one module a week, and one module was on Black students, one module was on immigrants, one module was on LGBTQ students. So the underlying logic is that teaching is basically just a technical problem. If we could just find a way to help Black students catch up, if we could just find a way to build bridges for immigrant students, this underlying logic that we're supposed to be packaging our educational services for future teachers, it's one of those things that remains unquestioned. I committed a taboo. I started teaching that there's a link between white supremacy and capitalism, and that it operates on Black and brown bodies in schools, and it socializes them, things that students would learn anyway in graduate school, but in a foundations course for undergraduates at a historically white university in a very conservative area of the United States. Like I said, this didn't go over well. But going back to Donyell's point, I had also been coached on how to be careful about the things that you can control. So I had the good, had the rubrics and the syllabus, is always prompt, very respectful of students, responds to emails. So like I said, and you'll see that in my chapter when you buy the book, for all of those technical categories, I had, stellar scores, but students were still able to sort of inject those dangerous, those deadly comments about the type of knowledge that I was teaching. So I was teaching it appropriately, but what I was teaching was dangerous. That's a word that keeps popping up. Dangerous. Crazy is another word that keeps popping up. And yet, ironically, in those last boxes at the bottom, students would still write in things like, "Oh, my favorite class, I still enjoyed coming to see him. He's very personable, or he's very intelligent." Well, I was trying to reconcile that, and it makes sense, right? Because I think students know it's going to be used for evaluation. And so I think students know that once somebody in a position of power sees this, they're going to take it more seriously than an email that's all negative. That's what I mean by weaponizing and strategizing the way that sets are deployed.
Thank you, Dr. Vasquez. Dr. Lightfoot, are you still with us? This next question is actually for you. Actually, I'm going to direct it to you only because you referenced your extensive experience in corporate America during some of your opening remarks. So the question is to Dr. Lightfoot, and actually to all of the presenters, can you comment on how this behavior translates to corporate America? This person that's attending today says, "I feel Black and brown people are judged differently under the guise of evaluations being equal or fair." So what did you observe in corporate America with respect to evaluations, and how does that translate?
Okay, so excuse me for a second because I had to move out. I was in a space where a class was actually starting. So give me a second. So I want to piggyback on what Ramon was saying about the whole idea of, I guess I thought about Taylorism in scientific management and this whole neoliberal educational reform movement that has been something that K-12 institutions have been, tried to challenge and putting teachers, in this whole efficiency and scientific way of teaching, so that they can evaluate you based on, whether or not you're giving the kinds of instruction that leads to, improved academic achievement, improved test scores and all that. So, the whole privatization of public schools primarily is what concerns me. And so to me, I look at that as a connection between corporate America. Corporate America is about business, it's about profit. And as you say, Ramon, connecting capitalism with white supremacy and maintenance of the status quo, and that college professors and academic achievement and looking at scores as if they are some kind of scientific instrument, to me is wrong. So I learned, in my experience in corporate America, and how we're evaluated for promotion, similarly to how evaluations are done in the academy, and ultimately it boils down to this. And I mentioned this scholar, former mentor, Linda Tillman, Dr. Linda Tillman. Some of you may be familiar with her. And she said it really boils down to whether they like you or not. If they like you, you get tenure. If they like you, you get promoted. If they feel that you belong here, you're a good fit, you get promoted, you get tenure. And you could have questionable evaluations. You can have marginal scholarship, and your service can be spotty. But if they like you, if they think that you're a good fit, they can socialize with you, off the job, what have you. It works out for you. So, but I would not put emphasis on that and work on that. But I would make sure that in spite of that, being liked is good. It's nice to be liked. But I think ultimately what we have to make sure is that our teaching is top notch. Our scholarship is, cutting edge. Our service, we have a commitment to service that, is about transformation. And so, in spite of whether they like you or not, you will earn tenure. Nobody gives you tenure. You earn tenure. Nobody promotes you, gives you a promotion. You earn your promotion based on the standards and criteria that they establish that you agree to at the point of hire and the point of continuation of employment, with that institution. So.
Thank you so much, Professor Lightfoot. And so one final question from the chat, but before I do that, I just want to share that, we are also streaming live on Facebook, and so many of our Facebook watchers have expressed appreciation for this conversation, for your authenticity, for your transparency, and for your expertise. And I just want to say, because we will be ending in about 5 minutes, that the presenters have all been gracious enough to share their contact information. So if you'd like to continue the conversation, we will be sharing their email addresses at the end. But this last question, before I turn it back to Dr. Taylor, comes from the chat. What else should universities be doing to address the racism that leads to weaponizing student evaluations of teaching, both with students completing them and also the way they get used by administration? So this is to any and all of you.
I think that, and I talk about this too in the book, I think separating yourselves from it, Dr. Rosoboro also mentioned it, is qualitative data. So what are students telling us that's deeper than the numbers? What Dr. Vasquez mentioned in terms of the comments, right? Like the initial knee jerk is like, what? They said this, they hate me, or they love me because I'm always here 24/7. What are they really saying? And so, and then what are the social constructs around what they're saying? Am I liked because I'm a Black woman, I'm here 24/7 and always available? Does that make me more affable? What are they telling us? And what do we want to be about? How do we take that information? How do we position ourselves as students of what they're teaching us to re-envision something different? So I think that just kind of removing the way course evaluations can be used, again, in very punitive ways, right? And making promotion and tenure decisions, or determining whether or not this person gets a raise or not, move away from that a little bit and really examine what they're telling us, teach from it, learn from it. That would be what I would hope.
Is there a last question to your
Um,
guest?
let's see. I think I must ask a question that Dr. Deepa had asked. Yes. How do racist teaching evaluations affect pedagogic quality?
Well, I think it affects it. It makes you a little bit paranoid. You have to have a healthy dose of paranoia anyway, I think, as a Black professor teaching at a predominantly white institution. Because, you know, it's just there. It's at the undercurrent, it's just above the surface. It's pervasive, it's there. And so I think it behooves you to just understand how it operates and how you're going to navigate your way through it and around it, if you're going to be successful in the academy.
I will just add quickly, this is just my perception based on my experience. I think it's re-traumatizing. So, and I, as a department chair, did not deal with that in the best way. I don't think I addressed that at all. So as a faculty member of color, to have to reread and relive this experience potentially every semester, how do we actually respond to the faculty member in the midst of that re-traumatizing? And how do we help faculty members? How do we help equip them with self-care or different ways to take care of ourselves in the process? That's the one piece that we still are I'm still working on, at least.
And for me, counterintuitively, it tells me that I'm doing the right thing. Because if I got back email that said, you know, I really liked everything we did in the class, I feel like I'm prepared to go into urban schools and teach Black and brown kids, then I would have failed. So when I read those racist comments that say, you know, I don't know what I learned in this class, he's teaching us crazy stuff, that actually reinvigorates me in a weird sort of way, and it makes me think, you know, that I'm doing something that's valuable. And I wanted to just add quickly that in my chapter, I don't want to pinpoint all of the blame, so to speak, on the students, because the students are operating in a system. Ultimately, we're all, to different levels, we're all complicit, but especially chairs and deans and provosts and presidents. And that's a hard thing to say when you're untenured like me, but that's the reality. And that's the reality. They're the ones who ultimately take up these instruments and use them to make decisions about PNT, or about what times our classes are going to be offered, or even what classes we're supposed to teach, right? That's one of those things that goes unsaid too, is that faculty of color are sort of just plugged into whatever, even if it's an area completely out of our expertise, because we're just like things.
I want to thank all of you so much. Thank you, Dr. LeVada Taylor, for editing such a stunning collection. Thank you to Dr. Rosoboro, Dr. Lightfoot, Dr. Vasquez, for being so, again, transparent and helping us sort of unpack the messy truth behind student evaluations of teaching. The book, again, is called Implications of Race and Racism in Student Evaluations of Teaching, The Hate You Give. This has been an installment of the Purdue University Northwest series on race, racism, and anti-racism. And we're going to put up a slide to show you just a second where you can go. Here's the link. This is where you can go to actually purchase the book. Use that coupon code. We'll get you a special 30% off when ordering. So again, The Hate You Give, Implications of Race and Racism in Student Evaluations of Teaching. And then next time, Tuesday, November 2nd, 12:30 to 1:45, we'll have our next installment, Princes of Peace and Ethics of Protest, Gandhi, King, Dalai Lama, and Mandela, with Professor Majumdar and yours truly. So we hope you can join us either in person or Zoom synchronous, 12:30 to 1:45. Thank you so much.